Hello and welcome everybody to this afternoon's session. This is a round table around the topic of a piece of work that actually was done during the course of the pandemic, looking to see how contact centres have been responding. And I guess unbeknownst to us really that our timing is impeccable in the sense that, of course, this is from a UK perspective, an England perspective anyway, the day when we're going back down into lockdown. And so what we wanted to do was to double down on part of that research, which was all to do with how we have seen change taking place, initially from customers translated into an organizational response. And roughly speaking, we have a theme today looking at the new ways in which organizations and customers are engaging with each other. And to that extent, we've invited a panel of experts from a variety of brands that you can see here on the screen. And what we're really trying to look to do is to use and leverage their insight from the work that they're doing with multiple brands right now and see if we can get a general overview of what's been taking place in the market. So to that extent, let's just do some very quick introductions. My name is Martin Hill-Wilson. I work for Brain Food, my own organization, and my particular role today is to be moderator. And I'm going to ask the rest of my august panel to introduce themselves quickly, maybe starting with Stu.
Thanks, Martin. Hi, everybody. Stu Dorman, Chief Innovation Officer at Sabio. So I look after our AI and emerging technology practice at Sabio. Work very closely with the industry and really looking forward to the debate this afternoon.
Thank you very much. Natalie.
Hi everyone, I'm Natalie Keatley. I work for Avaya and I head up the solutions marketing practice globally at Avaya, which includes all our portfolios across CCaaS, UCaaS and CPaaS.
Thank you very much. Brendan.
Hi, yes, I'm Brendan Dykes, Senior Product Marketing Director at Genesis, based in the UK and covering the whole portfolio.
Lovely, thank you. David.
Thank you. So good afternoon, everybody. So David Cousins, I head up the contact center and flex specialist practice here at Twilio. Again, been working in the contact center arena for far too long, so 22 plus years perhaps. Again, keen to again participate in this this particular panel.
Fantastic. And finally, Steve, if you'd like to introduce yourself. Oh. Can't hear you, Steve.
That's going to be the phrase of 2020, isn't
it? Well, anyway, let's see if we can get Steve. Steve's coming back on, so he can get a chance to talk in a wee while. This is a slightly different kind of thing. It's not going to be full of slides and all the rest of it. It's much more of a discussion. By the way, there are a number of opportunities through polls for you to participate, and also please, do take the opportunity to post questions in the chat window. I'll try and fold those into the discussion as we go through. If there are outstanding ones, we will honor the point of getting back to you, even if it means after the end of this particular session. But this is much more of a discussion focused around a number of key questions. And to that end, I'm just going to start off with really an overview just to get us into the discussion. And I'm going to be asking my panel really, from their perspective, seeing through the eyes of the clients, what sectors have been experiencing significant fluctuation, really as the result of the pandemic? Has it gone up? Has it gone down? Has it stayed the same? Has it just actually been completely unpredictable? So again, a quick rapid view of what's been taking place. Natalie, would you like to kick off your observations there?
Yeah, absolutely, Martin. And I think, look, in the customer experience world, there was no doubt when this pandemic hit that it was going to be one of those parts of any business that was going to be massively affected, because all of a sudden you had a huge change in the way people were working. You had to move agents to home. All of a sudden that meant disruption, long waiting times, customers getting frustrated. From an agent perspective, it meant huge workloads, dealing in uncertain circumstances, huge complexity around the things that they were having to deal with. And some sectors were really, really hard hit by that. I think retail was one of the ones where all of a sudden everything moved to online, and unbelievable rate, and the only way in which they could interact with customers was through these digital channels. And I think in a lot of instances we saw them being very unprepared. But also things like the banking sector, with people all of a sudden going, you know what, it's no longer about me asking for a mortgage, I need to find out if I can qualify for a mortgage holiday. All of a sudden they were absolutely overwhelmed. And then sectors like the travel sector, not for what they normally do in terms of bookings, but actually people contacting them to find out what happens now. Can they rebook? Can they get a refund? And I think for me, it really hasn't mattered what sector it's been. The impact has been significant, because for most customer service functions, they've had to do things that they don't normally do on a regular basis. So instead of doing things like bookings or sales, they've had to do the opposite. It's been reversals, it's been refunds, it's been chasing down orders that have gone missing. And that has had a huge impact from a customer perspective, but also for those working in customer experience, irrespective of the sector that they're in.
Got it, thank you. Dave, anything else you can add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's been, I guess, to Natalie's point, fluctuation both sides. I mean, you take customers like Just Eat, Deliveroo, Food Hub, again, customers of ours that naturally have increased in volume substantially, because let's be honest, we've all been at home and now all of a sudden can't go to a restaurant again for the next 4 weeks at least. Versus, you know, travel customers, people like Love Holidays, Virgin Holidays, whose demand has increased, but not actually in a good way. Again, to Natalie's point, it's around, you know, delivering refunds, delivering information based on actually no bookings taking place. And then what we've also seen is huge spikes in demand from online education, GP surgeries, sort of deploying video, contact and trace solutions born every minute across the globe by virtue of need. So actually new fluctuations for things that didn't even exist prior to the pandemic happening. So it has been tough, and I think, you know, certainly we've been busier than ever, and I've got probably far more grey hair than I did perhaps back in January, but we've certainly seen that fluctuation hit people quite hard, particularly as, you know, furlough took form, not just trying to understand and work out how to get people working from home, but actually I've got a workforce that's perhaps 15–20% of what it used to be, managing a demand that's significantly higher. Probably a good one for us is QVC, the home shopping network, because again, you know, we're all at home. I've certainly personally bought far too much stuff than I would ever need through boredom in lockdown. And again, they were in exactly the same position. So having to deal with lots more demand, even though, as I say, less people to deal with it.
Okay, thanks. Stu, anything else you can add to that?
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt from our perspective that the contact centre has borne the brunt of this wave of demand that's come in. And on the one hand, you've had, you know, demand side issues, both increasing and decreasing depending on which sector you're in. And on the other hand, you've had supply side issues, if you like, in terms of people to be able to deal with that demand when it comes in. Right at the start of the pandemic, obviously everyone rushed to home working, and that took a while to settle down. Broadly speaking, it's been pretty successful, but certainly, you know, the capacity to deal with that incoming demand was diminished, certainly at the start, and it's settled down a bit now. And on the supply side, I mean, particularly, you know, retail we saw unbelievable amounts of demand, you know, way dwarfing what you would expect to see on times like Black Friday, which normally is the busiest time of year. Huge volumes of demand coming in with people that were trying to do stuff online, but that maybe couldn't, or people that just weren't used to doing stuff online, people that were vulnerable and reaching out and wanting to get their toilet roll and their bread and various different things like that. So yeah, it's really fluctuated massive. Generally speaking, I think there's been a huge increase in demand, but it's fluctuated quite significantly. But like I say, the contact centre's borne the brunt of it, no doubt.
Steve, quick introduction maybe now you've arrived.
Yes, apologies for that. Hopefully you can hear me now, Martin.
Yes, can do.
Great. Okay, thanks everyone. So Steve Bell, I'm responsible for solution consulting for the customer engagement solutions here at Verint. And I just pick up on those threads. I think as well as, you know, the very different demands that we saw in different lines of business, I think you also looked at new services that had to be launched. So local government suddenly having to track 40,000 citizens who've got particular needs for food parcels or hot food deliveries or mental health checks or any of those things. This was something they never had to do before, and over 48 hours they suddenly had to do that while also trying to move their own staff home and cope with their own employees going off sick. We saw the bounce back loans and the business interruption loans being launched by financial services, where hundreds of thousands of applications being handled incredibly quickly. New services being launched in 3 hours. How do you do that when the workforce is also trying to cope with adjustments? I think was one of the big factors we saw come into play there.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. So I'm going to give Brendan the chance to second guess the audience's reaction to this question, and ask the audience to now have a go at a poll, which basically is going to say, since the pandemic, from your point of view of your contact volumes, have they fluctuated? Have they grown? Have they shrunk? Have they stayed the same as before the pandemic? So if you can consider that and answer that in terms of which one best describes your situation. Brendan, I'm going to give you the chance to play Mystic Meg here. And
right.
What do you imagine is likely as an aggregate, damn difficult question this, is going to be a common response?
Well, I don't think it'll have shrunk. I mean, I'm taking the co-op who we talked with yesterday, Martin, as a bellwether. Yeah. And when you imagine a business which does retail, that has funeral businesses and financial services, and I think they saw all three of those segments grow. So I think it's not going to have shrunk, and it's probably not going to have stayed the same. So grown or fluctuated, I would be going with. Probably, I'd go with grown, which is probably the obvious answer. But I guess it's fluctuated as the world is. Oh. It wasn't far out.
There we go. Well, actually, I can't see. So can somebody read me out the numbers?
Sure. So fluctuated was at 37%, grown was at 56%, shrunk was at 7%, and stayed the same as 0. So 80, 90% if it was either grown or fluctuated. So yeah,
right,
pretty close.
Interesting. So that's the scene setter for us then. And within that context, I think it's interesting to then say, so how have organizations responded, and what have we done as a result of that? And I'd like to start with looking at the channel that really we've probably all used mainly for the last couple of decades, which is live assistance, and probably in terms of the default it's being voice. And I'd like to dig in a little bit about seeing what changes we've now seen, particularly between the modalities of voice, text. Dave made the interesting point about growth in video. I mean, certainly, we've all done Zoom, we've all done Team till the cows have come home. So that's come onto the agenda in a way that maybe we haven't seen before. So again, maybe starting from a Twilio perspective, let's talk a little bit, Dave, about some of the growth that you've seen maybe that has been unique to this period.
Yeah, I mean, again, to reiterate, I mean, video has been certainly the largest by virtue of again, industries like doctor on demand services, obviously checking. We've seen quite a lot in automotive. So again, people buying and making buying decisions prior to, in some cases, not even being able to turn up at the forecourt until an allotted appointment time. So video is definitely one that's grown. And I think by virtue also of the fact that, during lockdown 1, shall we call it now, we were Zooming our relatives, we were having pub quizzes on a Saturday night. People have just become accustomed to video as a day-to-day. I think the other thing that we've seen though is also an increase actually in live chat to an extent. Organizations that perhaps hadn't considered using it before, recognizing that again, because they've got less people, they can get concurrent communications going. They've got a lot of FAQ capability deployed in that space, and we've seen live chat increase. The other one is WhatsApp. So WhatsApp has been growing as a channel for some time. Actually, we've seen a lot more usage of WhatsApp probably in the past 6-7 months than we had in the sort of prior 3 or 4 in that particular regard. Again, people wanting to personalize, have this concept of an open session that goes beyond sort of traditional SMS. Be able to share documentation information, make it a much more sort of dynamic experience. We've even had some customers, and I can't necessarily mention their names, but they've even been preempting on their website the best channel for a customer to use during this time based on an SLA. So all of a sudden, we're almost presenting people with if you go to WhatsApp, will respond to you within an hour. If you try voice, the wait time might be 3.
Sure.
We're actually influencing that shift around some of those channels. So yeah, we've just seen, I guess, growth overall, really.
Yeah, I think that's a really fascinating. In fact, I've just written a blog post on that very topic, which is, as we're getting more diversity coming in, are we also needing to prompt our customers on the best line of sight to that outcome? And I think that's a perfectly valid, thing to be doing to reduce the potential complexity that all this omnichannel is going to produce. One thing I'm dead interested in is, I think we mentioned collectively just before we went live today that, one of the silver linings of this pandemic has been to nudge us collectively forward. I think somebody mentioned that we're probably 6 years ahead of where we would otherwise have been. And does that mean that we've actually caught up with ourselves or advanced? And certainly if you travel the world, messaging is pretty common and ubiquitous, certainly in the southeast of Asia. Messaging here still seems to be a novel thing relative to web chat. And I wonder, anybody like to volunteer a view about maybe a change of appetite from their clients they've noticed, outside of what Dave's already mentioned, that maybe messaging is going to be starting to become more prevalent, because let's face it, as a consumer habit, it's been out there for ages.
It's interesting because I think, definitely web-based, text-based communication has become very big because people have struggled often because they haven't been able to get through on the phone. It's not necessarily been their first port of call. And again, from some of the study work that we've done over the pandemic period, we've found that people are still wanting to use the telephone. It's their preferred channel, particularly in times of difficulty. They'd rather talk to somebody than they would want to use another channel. But often, if they want to do something quickly and it's straightforward enough, then text has become the natural channel of choice. And so, yeah, I've seen, again, big growth in text-based communications, email, messaging, and live chat.
Bill over at Severn Trent has just installed messaging and interestingly has turned off chat as a result. I don't know if anybody else sees that as a potential trend. Stuart, caught you grinning there. Does that ring now?
No, it's an interesting one, and I think I agree with Brendan actually. In times of turmoil and when there's uncertainty, people naturally want that reassurance and they want to speak to somebody. And if you think about what's taken place over the last 6 to 7 months, people are worried about their mortgages, they're worried about getting food, and naturally they're going to want to speak to someone to get that reassurance. But what I do see is once that initial comfort call takes place and that reassurance is given, then a switch to messaging for follow-up mortgage, repayment issues or whatever it happens to be, switching to messaging and carrying that conversation on asynchronously with a person, but for using WhatsApp or text. I think we've definitely seen a lot of people doing that now, and I see that as a trend going forward. And it's about people getting more comfort with it. As we talked about briefly earlier on, we see in our Singapore office in Asia, there's a huge uptake in messaging, and people are just naturally more comfortable doing it in that part of the world. Here in Europe, less so, but it's definitely growing.
Well, referencing the research. Sorry, Dave.
I was going to say, just the other thing we've seen, we talk very much about incoming messaging. We've also seen a huge influx, or I guess, pun intended, of proactive outbound messaging.
Yeah.
I think in 2019, Twilio sent about 40 billion SMSs globally. I think, again, it'll be interesting to see what those numbers are like this year. But because of the huge amount of huge amount of misinformation that's been going on this past 9 months, a lot more customers are being proactive. So they're sending SMSs prior to even a customer coming in on a particular channel. They're sending out, an email, a WhatsApp, something else that circumvents a demand that perhaps otherwise would have happened without any control. So I think it's both ways. And again,
so let's join that idea up. I mean, I think it's probably true that our natural and preferred channel to date, being voice, has come under attack, particularly with the growth and the fluctuation we've seen. That's caused our customers to certainly look for alternative ways to communicate. Also online, I think, has got text is a natural companion at the moment to online, although video is coming there. And certainly the research that this whole discussion was predicated on, we heard lots and lots of feedback that chat, social have gone from hundreds to thousands, or from thousands to 10 to thousands, absolutely significant. And then as another way of deflecting that inbound, to pick up Dave's point, we've also seen a constant communication going out from organizations trying to preempt customer needs and therefore satisfy, you know, the need to be informed, the need to understand, by being proactive as a result of that in a way that maybe we haven't seen before that. Steve, how does that chime at all with anything that you've been seeing with the clients?
Yes, it does. I think the interesting thing we've seen is some real changes in consumer behaviour. They're certainly much more willing to switch channels. They're very willing to be directed down that as well, where you know, we are incredibly busy. We're helping our vulnerable customers and key workers, but actually, please try and reach us through email, chat, or self-service. And the other thing we've also seen is a big, much bigger acceptance from consumers towards self-service. So I think the channel hopping is much more acceptable to people now. And I think the self-service is much better. I think organizations still have to look at things like it still takes, for most chats, it takes twice as long to handle as it does on the phone. And I think people have still got to get to grips with why some of those issues are there, and just the sheer amount of time it's taking to handle chats versus live conversations, to really make sure we take advantage of this change in consumer behavior and acceptance, and don't lose that initiative by treating people badly, either through self-service or through some of the other channels.
Interesting question then. If we accept that probably we've reached a threshold where we really are going to be dealing with a number of channels in a much more balanced way regarding volume, what does this do for resourcing? Because the reason I ask this is that I can remember a couple of years ago at the forum, I didn't go into a particular session, and I just asked all the people sitting there on the workforce planning stands, you know, were they actually doing omni-channel planning? And they said, oh, no. It's the difference between the theory and practice here. It's still all single queues. And I was a little bit depressed by that answer, but it was interesting to have heard the honesty there. And I wondered whether or not, now this has grown, have any of you who provide, you know, workforce management solutions noticed clients beginning to say, hey, this is actually getting a little bit more complicated now. How do we avoid the fact that we've flipped everyone from chat into voice because we didn't plan it properly, and we're trying to actually now do a three-dimensional game of chess planning? Anybody got anything to offer on that point?
Yes,
Yeah,
if I can carry on there, Martin, just give a quick view there. We're certainly seeing, I think it's all part of the stabilization people are going through, where they're now saying this is going to be here with us for the long term, whether it's a hybrid workforce that's at home and in the office, or pure home working. How do we stabilize that? So how do we do our planning to reflect that? How do we do our planning for the cross-channel? I think actually the planning groups are handling this much better than other functions are. And if I look at my ability to contact an organization through phone, then the next day to email them, and the next day to chat, and actually them recognize me as a joined up consumer, is very, very rare still. And I think planners are doing a better job at this than we are in many, many other systems within the organization.
Thanks. Natalie?
I do think that one of the things that has come about because of this is the realization that the resources that are important here are just as likely to be digital resources and virtual assistants as they are live. And yes. I think that's one of the big changes that we're seeing, and where organizations are not necessarily needing to think along traditional lines. Oh, maybe we need to change the resource from a person perspective, but actually, how do you make sure that you support the resources to do the complicated work that they have to do across all these different channels as effectively as possible? And I think that's where AI and automation has really accelerated and come to the fore with these changing priorities in channels, because whatever live assistance looks like today, whatever it looks like, whether it's voice, whether it's video, whether it's text, whether it's, you know, messaging, it has to be underpinned by some form of support for the agent in real time. And I think that's the most critical thing that has to go into that whole planning process, is making sure they've got access to the right information, the right applications, the right resources, irrespective of what the channel is, what the volumes are, and where that customer may be in the journey.
I completely agree. Yeah. No issue with that. Any final comment on, have we seen methodology and demand for resource planning change in any significant way as yet, or is it early days? Stuart?
Yeah, one just quick observation. I think the fact that everyone's working at home now, and that's likely to stay certainly a hybrid mix, at least of that going forward. I think that does offer many more options, both for employees, for planners, for organisations, to think about the way that they structure their shifts and, you know, split shifts and being more flexible around people that maybe need to take the kids to school, working at home, etc. So that means we should be able to shape our supply curve much more closely to our demand curve by offering people more flexibility in their work-life balance. So I think that's a real positive that hopefully will come out of this.
That's great.
And we've seen that with we saw that with one of our customers who put their staff to work at home and are now actually starting to employ people as home workers because they found that flexible model was so much better for their staff, and they were able to plan around it using the workforce management tools that they had built into the Genesis platform.
Okay, that's great. Audience, time for you to make your voice heard. So here's our next poll for you, which is, what's been your fastest growing channel during the pandemic? Has it been chat, email, messaging, or SMS, to fuse those together, phone or video? So what's been your fastest one? And Stu, let me give you the job of having second guessed this. What do you think has been the fastest growing channel in aggregate amongst those options?
Well, it's an interesting one, because I would definitely say that the highest used channel has still been voice for the issues that I mentioned earlier on. You know, people are uncertain, they need some reassurance. In terms of growth, though, again, it's a difficult one. I think people are trying to do stuff online, they're falling back to messaging. So I'll probably say messaging and SMS, but that excludes all of us, you know, spending pretty much 24 hours a day chatting to people on video. So
that's true. So it might actually, from a very low base, prove to be the highest. Dave had an extraordinary stat earlier on. So are we ready to share the poll, the results? I can't see them, by the way, so can anybody read them out?
Pretty balanced. So we've got 14% chat, 31% email, 21% messaging, 24% phone, 10% video. So email, surprisingly, has been the fastest channel. So
what's dead interesting is if you go and look at Ofcom research, you know, which is a sort of global UK perspective, still tells you that email remains across all generations in aggregate the most popular channel. Of course, it's difficult to secure and authenticate, but it's remarkable how persistent it is, isn't it?
It is, you know, it tends to be the most expensive to serve and the least friendly from a CSAT perspective. But, you know, for me personally, I think that there's still a big opportunity for organisations to look at the way that they design their customer journeys. Because I still, to this day, I still see lots of contact us page where the big, you know, form that you fill out encourages you to send an email. And I think that's a really missed opportunity. People are trying to go digital, but they're encouraging email as the main channel.
And customers are using email like chat and expecting the same answering time. So it used to be acceptable to say we'll come back to you in 7 days, then 4 days, then 48 hours. And now people are expecting email to turn around in 3-4 hours. And so it's become a messaging channel in that same way as the sort of chat has become.
And there is no reason
on that channel as well.
It shouldn't. There's no reason it can't have an effective SLA attached to it, unless you're treating it as a separate channel where you send somebody to and look at it at midday and at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, which is what leads to the problem areas there. But again, I don't know if Natalie has a long memory, but I can remember talking about natural language parsing when I was in the systems integration space way back in the day. And it's interesting to see whether or not AI, which we're very much focused upon at the moment to help recognize intent and then be smart and triaging and routing, will reapply to email given its popularity. I mean, I think that's an outstanding issue that we might have to come to grips with.
It may be, but I also think that as messaging gains popularity, not just from consumers, because there is an increased trend that people want to use it to interact, but I think COVID has brought about a realization with organizations that it is a very effective channel for them, particularly if they've got people working from home, where maybe dogs barking in the background isn't the voice experience you want to give, but messaging agents can do from anywhere. And so I think it's probably going to, my guess is you're going to see email disappear with the messaging services increase, because they give the best of both, really. It's that immediacy but it's also the persistency that an email gives.
I have to say that view of the future, I do subscribe to being one of the most likely ways in which things get rationalized, that messaging does, because of its popularity with us, take over email, and certainly probably eats up a little bit of chat at the same time as well. You know,
Can I just add, Martin? I guess it's a segue probably from the last question as well, which is that I think traditionally the same challenge still exists, that most organizations have got pockets of staff or hubs or whatever you choose to call them that handle a particular channel.
Yes.
And email was always one of those that was done as a byproduct. So you'd have a team of 10 people, perhaps 8 do voice and 2 might do email, and they kind of alternate in that regard. And all that ever really did was meant that if I didn't respond to that email within a couple of hours, someone was going to call up anyway.
Yeah.
But I think that also still breeds that resource planning challenge. I mean, Stu and I did a session with Love Holidays the week before last, and one of the things that they said is that they're now confident that regardless of what channel we offer to our advisors, the experience for them is going to be identical. So taking away that, you know, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein view of the world, which is where most people have evolved from, adding different channels with different vendors to actually having a consistent way of handling them, which gives you just far more efficiency than you've ever been able to get hold of before.
It's a hot topic.
Basic.
It's a hot topic, and I didn't really mean to get into it, but I made a bit of a sort of narky comment on LinkedIn, and 6,500 views later, it was all about, you know, is every channel got to be real time, or is it acceptable to have delays and everything? And regardless of what the opinion was, it's very much top of mind at people, and there's a trend towards as close to real time as you can make it. Natalie, I think I just cut across you there. Were you going to say something?
Oh, no, I just was laughing at the fact that you got 6,000 views on something you hadn't really planned to open up.
I got well told off for the way I put it as well, but that's another story. So, all right, we've done live. Let's move on to self-service. We've kind of touched on that. It's obviously massive. A, because we've got so much growth in live. B, there's another context which I think matters, unless we happen to be very lucky, and there aren't many sectors that are very lucky. Many organizations' growth prospects looking forward are not looking too healthy. That means that's translated into budget cuts. That means it's translated into service cuts. And so if you would take the other side of it, of asking customers, are you going to forgive us because we can't therefore afford to look after you? The answer is absolutely not. And expectations are even higher than ever. So we've got a new challenge called improved customer experience at lower cost. And, you know, the secret conversation, which I'm sure happens in private, but not in these kind of public forums, is, of course, most of our budget in service still is headcount. And whilst it's true that self-service and AI augments as opposed to replace, you know, we are going to have to make sure that our self-service works in fundamentally a much more broader set of use cases than traditionally we've had. I personally believe that we should only use people for emotive, complex, and when the relationship matters. I've been, you know, everybody knows that kind of stuff. And to my mind, that's only a quarter of what inbound should be. I mean, there's the radical point to it. I really don't believe it should be the, you know, 50–60% that we've currently got. And that obviously requires a ton of transformation around the journeys. Sorry, have I got feedback going on here? No, okay. So self-serve is due to grow, is the point that I just wanted to get across here. And again, looking out through the lens of your clients as opposed to our personal perspectives here, what have you noticed change in the traditional self-service menu? You know, FAQs, blah, 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 blah. Is there anything fundamentally different that has been taking place in this last 6 to 9 months? Any hands up? Anybody wants to kick that one off?
Yeah, I'll happily take a start. I think well, there's always been a coming together of you know, technologies, particularly cloud technologies, and some of the, you know, applications that we all use in Alexas and Siris, and that kind of technology suddenly being made available through to call centres for a fraction of a few pence per interaction, and that's really created this foundational layer that's meant that people can now start to use natural language to understand intent. And I think, to your point, Martin, the big challenge with self-service really has been to figure out why the customer's contacting in the first place before you can figure out which journey to nudge them towards, whether that be the website, whether it be the call center because it's quite an emotive issue, or whether it's just something really simple that we can fulfill on an existing digital asset or a chatbot type of journey. So we've seen a huge increase in deploying these AI voice channel natural language platforms to establish intent. And the trick really for me is to start organically, start small, deploy what we call a skeleton model, and then gradually grow over time. Because I think a lot of people are still quite overwhelmed when they hear the term AI. They don't really understand exactly what it means and where to start. So a kind of start small approach and grow organically and tackle the problems that customers are really facing, and prioritize those is the approach that we're taking. And that's definitely been a huge focus for us over the last 6 months.
Are people still buying knowledge management, or has everyone gotten sucked into bots and think that it's got to have AI and bots for it to be worth an investment?
I think that AI is still the buzzword at the moment, but it needs to be underpinned with a really strong knowledge platform, regardless of what happens. So I think that's still massively important.
Brendan, what's the Genesis universe looking like in terms of new appetite for self-service?
I mean, we're again seeing it in the same spaces that Stuart was talking about. I mean, the whole bot space is really fascinating, and a lot of interest in that. A lot of interest in how you can predict when a customer is needing help. So a lot around predictive engagement and predicting the need of a customer. But also again on the agent side, which Natalie was pointing to, the need to be able to provide the right knowledge and right information at the right point, intelligently to the agent at the same time on that side. But self-service is also about is changing rapidly around the way that people engage. We talked again yesterday about the fact that voice is back in, and voice is becoming the new black, and that people are getting used to talking to their Alexas and their Google Homes, and that the voice interfaces again for self-service will become strong again. And an anecdote again from yesterday was one of our customers saying that they didn't think voice was going to be taken up very strongly by their client base, which was a more elderly client base. But they'd found that 30% of their calls now, people were using the voice element of the IVR. So voice, we're used to talking to each other. So I think the voice part of self-service is going to come back with some vengeance.
Voice is dead. Long live voice. It's
absolutely.
None of the core modalities are ever going to go. They're simply going to transform into different versions of themselves.
What communication channels have we ever decommissioned? Semaphore, maybe?
Yeah, absolutely. You made a really interesting point earlier, Natalie, just to pick up a thing Stuart was saying, which is that maybe what's beginning to change is a recognition that these aren't separate activities. They're part of a whole program of looking at things in the round, either through the lens of a service journey or the whole digital ecosystem that you've got to build. And I wondered if there's anything you want to add about saying, in context of self-service, it's not just saying here's a bot, it's actually thinking much more broadly than that.
Well, I think it absolutely is. It's about making the most of all the resources that you've got in your organization, and self-service is fantastic at enabling you to do that, whether it's doing it on behalf of someone or it's helping somebody to do something better because it's serving up information, or it's determining intent, or whatever it may be, or it's auto-populating forms for that matter. I mean, how much time is spent at the end of every conversation with a customer just filling in and doing the after-call work? So I think AI, intelligent self-service and automation is so powerful across all of this. But one of the areas we've seen with customers, which has really been amazing as a result of the pandemic, is they're starting to think out of the box with self-service. So we're seeing self-service actually as one of the things that is driving contact center practices, capabilities, workflows, and technology outside of the contact center, in fact. So, one great example that we had was when, the pandemic struck, and all of a sudden the government agencies and healthcare authorities were scrambling to figure out how they were going to do contact tracing. And we literally took some of the contact center capabilities, like proactive outreach, like our AI assisted self-service platforms, like our sentiment analysis, like our transcription services. We brought that together on our CPAS platform, and we worked with the health authorities through a body that had been brought together to try and look at how you do a better job of contact tracing. And that was, we stood it up in days. It was developed in days because it was taking bits from that already existed in a contact center environment, using the CPAS platform to then bring in the right integration and the right events, triggers. And we completely transformed a process, which is a non-contact, traditional contact center process, but leveraged all the best practice, all the processes, and all the applications in contact center with self-service. So to me, this is probably one of the most exciting spaces. There's just so much power here. And I think we're only scratching the surface on the use cases right now.
Yes. Anybody got examples, thank you very much for that one, of mobile first and maybe even app-based self-service taking place? Anything there to talk about? Dave, have you got anything at the front line on some of your clients?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, from our perspective, we've never really differentiated. So, you know, whether you're on a mobile app, whether you're WhatsApping in, web chatting in, emailing in, as far as self-service is concerned, it's done consistently. And it becomes quite interesting because what we tend to refer to when we talk about communication, we actually talk about a conversation. And a good example actually from the other week. So the Nike CEO, we were fortunate enough, presented at our customer event regarding their kind of deployment of Twilio. And the premise being that if I want a pair of trainers and I want them customized, I'll speak to the contact center, I'll inquire. Obviously the world changed in the sense that I couldn't necessarily, depending on where I was in the world, go to a store, but then I can have a conversation three-way with the individual, let's say Steve, that sat in store that has the box of trainers ready for me behind the counter, and that entire conversation is captured as a conversation and not just a piecemeal contact. And so when we talk about self-service, it is not just that single inbound contact of some description, it's that entire communication as well as servicing the advisor, the teller, the dealership manager, the retail employee, so that they've got exactly the same information at their disposal. Because what you tend to find is, even advisors still have the company website up to go and Google something if somebody asks a question about something. Actually, just trying to circumvent all of that. So again, it's just trying to be consistent. And contact tracing is a great example of that for sure. And we've seen a lot of that again across the globe in terms of being informative as part of that process, irrespective of where you are with regards to symptoms or otherwise. But yeah, I mean, consistency, regardless of channel, mobile app, otherwise, absolutely. And again, I think interesting point, by the way, from before, actually, Martin, is, people are accustomed to using us if they want to text their Uber driver or figure out where the guy is with their pizza. People are now trying to adopt exactly that same approach for retail banking, for other retail, for holiday bookings, because you know what, it's worked incredibly well within those arenas. And actually, as you said at the outset, people are now have the opportunity to catch up quite quickly. Yes. And self-service is a huge part of that.
Yes, and what I'm hearing you saying, and building on what Natalie mentioned as well, we should be, from a service design perspective, thinking about complete conversations and actually putting this together.
Yeah, channel agnostic. It doesn't matter what channel they're using. It should be a service that they can use irrespective of which channel they're in.
Yeah. So actually,
I would look at the counter argument to that as well, Martin, is that one of the biggest opportunities that I think this industry, the customer experience industry as a whole, is missing is identifying and understanding how much demand is created through their digital assets and then comes into their contact centers. And in our research, it could be as much as 60% of the calls that hit the call center come for somebody that's gone through the website. Yet most organizations have absolutely no idea, and they're unable to track that. It's completely disjointed. And there are very, very few organizations that are doing this well. And I think there's a huge opportunity to join that together and make it a much better experience and provide agents with much more insight into what customers have been doing so that they're prepared to give a better experience.
Well, I mean, just to that particular point, every single person who's here represents a product set that is absolutely capable of technically delivering that. And one thing I would say is the mindset that we have as organizations is the thing that we need to concentrate on. It always riles me and really deeply upsets me to talk about the contact center and then digital. I mean, that to me is an utter nonsense. I'm going to lose the war on winning that, but ever since I first learned how to spell SIP, I've understood voice to be digital inherently anyway. So what are we really talking about? It's a completely pejorative divide. It's a totally unnecessary one. And the contact center, if it's going to be the center, is the center of the whole goddamn thing anyway. You can call it something different, whatever you want. And that eventually will include sales and marketing for frontline and all the rest of the stuff. And as we connect through to the back office, it will mash up into a whole new universe. So I think that the mindset and how we initially conceive of what we're in the business of and who's involved is as important at this point as the technology which is already capable of enabling it. So that's my little soapbox.
I heard a great phrase yesterday, which was that a lot of organisations are putting digital lipstick on an analog pig, and I think
I love it.
what I meant by that was that the entire organisation has to be digital, not just the guys running the website. And I think that's
Steve, come on, let's give you some space to make some comments on this as well.
No, I think it's very similar. I think if you look at the information we've got about customers, there is almost no organizations are joining that up between digital and live contact of some flavor. And the opportunity is really just being missed there to take in data from digital, to take in from all your different channels, to normalize that so you know who that customer is across all the different channels. Take that data to enrich it with information from, transactions, CRM, all of those different places, and really get that picture of who the customer is and what they're doing with you. And there's been a lot of talk of customer journeys, but I don't think we've really got anywhere close to what we can do by assimilating the data from digital, from the contact center, from the back office, from the branch, take all that information about the customer, enrich it, and then bring it through the analytics tools that are now emerging to deal with that volume of data. But the key to it is, and it doesn't matter what anyone says, we've talked about this for a long time, is normalizing that data based on one customer and all of their different channel perceptions. So I think that's really where we need to go in terms of joining things up from a data point of view, is digital and contact center. They're all the same thing. It's just customer data, and you've got to look at it from the customer's angle.
Okay, let's move on.
Customers doing that. We have customers in banking and in retail who are, seeing what the customer is doing on the website and then tracking them into the contact center. If it's traceable, the big issue, as Steve was suggesting, is being able to have some way of tracking that across between channels.
That's great. Okay, I'm going to move us on in the interest of time. Natalie, I'd like you to play Mystic Meg on this next one, please, because we're going to ask the audience to tell us what they have been spending their money on in terms of self-service since the pandemic struck. So what new self-service options have you introduced? Is it bots, the text version? Is it bots, the voice version, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? You can see the list down there. And again, if you had to guess, maybe thinking about the clients that you've been working with, Natalie, what do you think is going to be probably the most popular investment to date?
Personally, I would say, based on the customers that we're working with, it would be either of the top two. A huge amount of investment in bots, whether that is text-based or voice-based, and in bringing natural language interfaces into any service.
I would have actually put that in if I was confident everybody knew what that meant, but I think that's the guts of it. I completely agree. Okay, that's great. Are we ready? Am I pushing things? Can anybody read that out?
And I was completely wrong. Completely.
Okay.
So we've got bots at 12%.
Yep.
Natural language, IVR, menu-based or natural language at 0%.
Right.
Web chat messaging at 29%.
Right.
FAQ and videos like how-to libraries 29%, and other 29%.
Yep. Oh, I tell you what then, if you put other, could you do us a favor and put in the chat window what other means? That would be really fascinating, because clearly too stupid to recognize that as a category heading. That would be fascinating to know. All right then, well that's good. That's trounced us a bit. Off we go. Let's continue. So we're done live, we've done self-serve. I'm just going to have a very quick thing because I'm running out of time here. Anybody got not just an example of proactive messaging, but a striking example of it? Anybody got one that completely goes, wow, that's really, really fabuloso? If we haven't, we can move on. But anybody got something that's worth a story here?
Nothing striking, unfortunately.
Nothing striking. The only thing I've noticed is that more of us are doing it lots. That's all I would probably say. Okay, and I do think, since we've themed it on AI, if you can spot a pattern, it means you can be proactive, look out for that opportunity. So let's just move on. Next one. Digital first has often turned up as a way of describing that we do things differently now. And again, I'd be interested in views of, in the real world, as opposed to our imagined one, what have we managed to persuade clients to think about, and what scope have they given to a digital first agenda? What does that really include? So back to a thing we've kind of touched on. Is it just literally, oh, I'm going to do chat now? Or have we been trying to say that, no, it's kind of broader than that, and it includes the following things? A very quick summary from anybody who's got something that they'd like to say about that in terms of digital first.
So I guess from my perspective, we're a lot of customers are making that transition from premise to cloud, and that's taken up a lot of their time. So they're doing the run, walk, fly part, and they're through run and into walking, and the flying bit is the digital part of it and how they bring it together. But we have a number of customers now who are taking that next step into not only recognizing when that a customer wants to use a chat channel or a digital channel, but they're also offering them assistance online and help at the moment of recognizing that they are struggling when they're going off path. So we're starting to see customers wanting to be guided through an assistance process as well.
Appreciate that. Natalie, how's that translating in your work?
Yeah, so I think one of the big things that our customers are realizing is that digital first actually encompasses the whole organization. And so it doesn't mean that just by putting digital first into your front end processes that your customers are working on and those people who are serving the customers, you actually have to do that across the entire business, because it's no good if you could do something at a click of a button, you've purchased something, but if the rest of the organization's battling to catch up, you've destroyed your digital first strategy. If they don't have information at their fingertips, if the contact center isn't able to interact with them immediately, if they're not able to make decisions on, is this customer important enough to do something different for, it ruins it. So I think that's been one of the big learnings, is it's got to be enterprise wide.
Yeah. Dave, how's that translated in your universe?
I would say exactly the same, really. So to echo Natalie's point, I think digital first for us has always been things like messaging, and some of that is proactive, some of that is reactive. I think new channels like WhatsApp as part of those digital initiatives, just to either remove sort of carrier costs or complexity. It has to be done as a whole. We do a lot of activities often about, what is the impact? What's the actual genuine outcome? Prior to this organization, I worked in outsourcing for 5 years, and often channels were just added for the sake of adding channels because that was part of an agreement, with very little knowledge around what the impact of that would have been, i.e., can we handle it? Do we have the right requisite skills? Are we just simply doubling down on our demands by virtue of, having transition from one to the other? I'll never forget doing a piece of work, and I won't mention the client name, but about 12% of all chats ended in a, please can you call this number, because actually we can't deal with that demand over the channel. And that was after generally about 7 minutes of chat. So we still see quite a lot of that. And again, the premise being, let's just make sure we can handle those demands either in a self-service AI automated fashion, or actually just making sure that our advisors are empowered to deal with them properly. Otherwise, we're just going to compound the problem.
So here's a question. I think that's absolutely right, and depending which side you're on in the discussion, if you're wanting to get it right on behalf of the client for the best reasons, we're always trying to extend the scope in the sense that you need a holistic perspective to get things to work. Clients themselves are often stuck with the fact that they've got to make stuff work. They need a narrow focus. They can't necessarily get the budget. Has anybody seen a willingness to entertain a broader context for the reasons that we've just explored than maybe pre-COVID, where it was very much more like, just let's get this one bit sorted, please? Stu, have you got any encouraging news on that?
Well, I'd say from an intention of transforming, yes. You know, what COVID did was break down a few barriers and get people thinking at a much more accelerated pace and having much more of a desire to digitally transform and adopt digital technologies and principles. However, what I've unfortunately observed more recently is that desire is starting to fade out a bit as, you know, things get bogged down in the usual security, you know, process, organizational change issues, which are slowing things down again now, which is a real shame. Because I think hopefully organisations were looking to capitalise on that desire right at the start of the pandemic. And I think for me, what true digital transformation really means adopting digital tools across the entire organisation and exploiting those tools using much more agile, fast-moving ways of working, driven by data, driven by A/B testing different scenarios, and using that to drive the next stage of the process. And those processes changing on a weekly, if not daily basis. And that's the bit where I think most organisations struggle. It's the cultural change required to really, truly adopt digital ways of working.
So agile, A/B testing, empirical, blah, 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 blah. Let's say that that's a little package. I think everybody here will recognize that. Has anybody, what's the balance? Is it that you find a client that's already invested and thank goodness we can work in that way? Has anybody managed to say, here's a way of working and introduce that as a sort of a priori before getting on with work? Or is that just too hard work at the end of the day?
I think the hardest thing is getting the organisation to change the way that they are used to working to then exploit these digital platforms. That's the big challenge, I think.
You have to work with the culture that's there.
More agile coming into the conversations and more people willing to embrace that approach, albeit slow. Sorry, Brendan, I cut across you there.
Yeah, that's all right. No, I was going to say, I think you have to work with the cultures there. Yeah, yes, many organisations are taking an agile approach and are much more willing to try and test, etc. But again, it all comes back to what are they trying to achieve? You know, are they, the digital channels are great, but if they deploy them in a way that doesn't match their brand values, it doesn't. You know, the big drive that we've seen through the COVID time is a move towards a more empathetic approach towards customers. They need to be much more able to take a customer from the point that they're actually at themselves and being able to support and enable them in that process. And that's a change of way of working, not necessarily a change of technology, but it's a change of the way that you apply that technology.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to skip now to our last poll because I'd like to get a sense of where our audience is at for the next period of time. So the question is, which of the following themes are important to your 2021 strategy? And I've done them as themes and from and to. So from a sort of command control way of working to self-management, from historic to real time, from multi-channel to omni, from premise to cloud, from reactive to proactive, from voice to digital, from waterfall to agile, to pick up the conversation that we were just having before. It's not the top one, it's just any of those that realistically have captured your imagination as an organization and you really intend seriously to try to make some progress in terms of moving the dial and evolving from one way of doing things to another. Be very interested in that. And who am I going to give this task to? Dave, go on then, you can be the guesser. What do you think is going to be some of those that will be most popular?
God, I think that's a very good question. I think real time is a big one, particularly now that we don't necessarily have sight of people or have sight of that interaction. If you go back to the questions, one sec, Martin, I haven't got them on the screen anymore.
No, sorry.
Oh, there we go. We've got the answers anyway.
Let's share those. Actually,
I'll share those. So historic to real time is 25%, multi-channel to omni-channel 38%,
right.
On-prem to cloud 13%, and then from voice to digital 56%. So that's certainly the majority, and then others 0%.
Okay, interesting. Well, thank you very much for that. We've actually now got to pretty much top of the hour. So as ever, time has defeated us, but topics to talk about have not. We could have continued for the rest of the day. I would like to very much thank the panel, Natalie, Stuart, Brendan, Steve and David, for a really interesting, fascinating conversation. Thank you for sharing your perspective on that. I hope you as the audience enjoyed and found that valuable. It is based upon some research that was done, which is still available for download. I'm sure if you reach out to Stu or anybody else at Sabio, they'll be more than willing and happy to share that. And I hope that you have learned something from this discussion, and I'd like to thank you for your participation and wish you well for the rest of the day. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.